What I've seen with so many high performers is there's a part of them that believes that inner critic that can be very loud has helped them get to where they are today. So they think if they somehow let go of that voice, it's constantly being so mean and harsh, they'll somehow lose their edge. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not true. Look at your grandkids or your kids like 20 years from now. What would you want them to say in terms of the type of leader you were? What would you want them to say? And what does it look like to live into that vision?
Meet Dwayne. He stands in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, replaying yesterday's executive meeting for the 10th time.
Why did I say that?
It was a small comment about tightening timelines before deliverables slipped in Q4. It was relevant, reasonable, but in Dwayne's mind, it landed wrong.
Stupid. It was forced. See, they know you're not really COO material.
Nobody else seemed to think twice about it, but Dwayne did. He's the chief operating officer for a mid-size accounting firm, and people see him as solid, steady, unemotional, the kind of leader that doesn't flinch. But inside, he's carrying far more than anyone sees. He cares deeply about his people, so much so that he overextends himself.
Dwayne, can you take a look at this?
Send it to me, I'll handle it.
He steps in too often. He absorbs too much. Then he walks away feeling drained and exhausted, wondering why leadership feels so heavy. At home, he's a devoted husband, a proud father of 2 daughters, and he's a new grandfather. And when he holds that baby, everything in his life feels lighter. But then that voice returns.
You should be doing better.
Dwayne wants to feel calmer, more authentic, less guarded, to have the confidence that so many assume he has. Today, I'm speaking with Kristen Harcourt, executive coach, keynote speaker, an emotional intelligence expert who helps leaders move from self-doubt and reactivity to steadiness, confidence, and connection. And I'm excited to hear how Kristen would help someone like Dwayne to quiet the inner critic and lead in a way that's both strong and human. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Kristen, I was reading a lot about you, and so much of what you care about, I care about. We're on the same page in so many ways. One thing I'm interested in learning about, though, is that you jumped out of a plane for charity. What's that story?
Oh, the story is even funnier because at the time I had just about 1-year-old and 4-year-old, and my family was not very happy with me. They're like, that is very irresponsible as a mother to be doing vomit. It's not a good idea. But I'm also someone who I love putting myself out there. I love being uncomfortable. I love challenging myself and doing things that might feel scary. And when there was charity on top of it, that it's not only that I'm doing something where I get to grow and stretch, but then also I can raise money. It was for Free the Children. And I think I ended up raising around $2,500. So I was like, it's a win-win.
I love it. I love it. I did once jump out of a plane myself. It was maybe 17 years ago. Maybe less than that. I don't know. That was a while ago. And I mean, it was an incredible experience. Would you do it again?
I would. I was actually talking about something about that the other day. And Yeah, that feeling of just the freedom and that flow as you're jumping out like that, and I think every time you do it, there will probably be new insights or new and I'm not the same person I was when, my son is now 13 and my daughter 16, so a lot has changed and I've grown since then, so I feel like new insights would show up for me.
Yeah, I would say too that that adrenaline was unlike anything that I've ever experienced. I mean, it stayed with me for hours afterwards, and it's always been one of those things where I said I would do it again, and I haven't. But now that we're talking about it, maybe who knows? Maybe this summer is the summer to do it. I don't know. I'm curious too to hear your story into coaching because I know that you're really passionate about it. You're really passionate about the breakthroughs that you have with your clients and the ways in which you evoke those aha moments. So what got you into it from the beginning? What got you interested in coaching and then speaking?
Yeah. It's so interesting, Jay, because now when I look back, I realize that I've been a coach really all my life. And back in the day when I was, 10 and 13 and 14, I was constantly coaching people, right? I'm insatiably curious. So I'm just always wanting to ask questions to help somebody, like just to understand the situation better, but then also asking that person a lot of questions just because I'm like, oh, helping them to also be curious. And I was such a mediator with my parents when I was younger too, when they would be having challenges. I would say, what she's trying to say is, and no, what he actually says. And I remember being like, it's so funny now as a coach, I remember being like 10 in the back seat doing this for my parents. But of course, you don't have any language to be able to articulate back then, like, oh, this is a job, like this is something you could be doing and get paid for. So it's interesting. So there was many different signs when, of course, when you look back that pointed me into having that natural inclination to really be good and enjoy coaching. But I think as I got older and as I got more experience and as I got myself into different situations and even myself at some point before I became a coach, I worked with a coach too. And I just saw how powerful it is to give yourself the gift of space to only be focused on learning more about yourself and who you are and what really matters and how you want to show up in the world and what it looks like to continue to be able to excel. And I think like you and I are also, I'm sure, very connected in being type A, high achiever, high performers that are always looking for ways to improve. But I think also in some ways I can be very radically independent. So sometimes it was me just focusing on the development, thinking, oh, I can just do this all by myself. I don't need anybody else to help me. And then I realized how powerful it is to have somebody else to be there and be your side because they ask you sometimes really deep questions, sometimes really uncomfortable questions that you wouldn't have necessarily asked yourself. But also through that, asking those questions, it's not just you ask the question and like, okay, that's great, and then move on. Then they're helping you to dissect and move through this new information and these incredible breakthroughs and insights and understandings and perspective shifts. And so, of course, once I went through that and experienced it and started to understand that there's a job that you could get paid and do this and be able to help others and then as soon as I started, to do my coaching program and started really be able to support people in that way, it's just one of those moments where you just know, like, this is my calling. This is the work that I'm here to do in the world.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So often, what we end up doing is helping people in the way that we were helped years prior, right? The kind of transformation that we went through, and we become the advocate for it because we found so much benefit. So, what was going on in your life that made you seek out coaching? What was the challenge that made you go, okay, I can't figure this out on my own. I am finally ready to get some help.
Yeah, such a great question. I think two things. I think one was I was going back to work after my second mat leave. And in Canada, we get a whole year off for mat leave. So, like, you really are stepping away and going back in. And at that point, when you have, two young kids, I had a pretty demanding job, and I was really wanting to understand what work-life integration looked like, and how I was going to be able to. It's interesting because I love being a mom, and I love working. Like, I love them equally. And so I needed to figure out, how can I do this in such a way that I'm not feeling like I'm not showing up as the best in either way. And so I needed to figure out how to be able to do that effectively. And then I think the other piece, which I wouldn't have been able to articulate at that moment, but there was an itch inside. There was something just telling me, I know there's something else when it comes to my career trajectory, which really was that itch that I've had since I was 20 years old, which is to be an entrepreneur. And
Mm.
so I also needed to be able to work through a lot of those fears around what would it look like to be able to take a leap of faith and be able to be my own boss and be an entrepreneur. But that the second piece, I couldn't articulate it, that that's what I was seeking, but there was something where I felt there's this void, there's this thing that's in me that I can't really name, that I want to do next. I'm being pulled somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly where I'm being pulled.
So you felt something before you could really understand logically what it was. It was some sort of feeling, and you feel like the support that you got from a coach really helped to clarify what that feeling was really all about.
Yeah, it was really. I've always been deeply intuitive, and I think, and coaching helped me with this as well, is getting better at trusting that intuition. So the intuition was telling me something, I could feel it in my body, but I also think at that point I wasn't as connected to like the somatic and how we work with that and make decisions from that part that's getting your attention. And coaching was so good at being able to get that clarity.
Yeah. And then of all the things that you could be coaching on and speaking on, it seems like your wheelhouse, emotional intelligence and mindfulness and self awareness. Why, of all things, is that what you feel is your calling, as well as what you feel yields great results for leaders, especially in environments where there's a lot that they're dealing with?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. So I've been always surrounded by very linear thinkers, and I have a part of me that also is very logical and rational. But to the point, like my mom was in finance, my dad was an engineer, my ex-husband was an engineer, my brother was a teacher, but he was definitely like a technical teacher. So I was always surrounded by those types of individuals where they, not to say that they didn't have high EQ, but they were definitely, you would maybe describe them as being less emotional in the way they made their decisions and the way they saw the world. And so I think what ended up happening is I got really good at understanding how to be able to support those linear thinkers and ask questions in such a way that I could pull things out of them that felt perhaps maybe a little bit less uncomfortable for them, right? Because sometimes that can be super, super vulnerable.
Yeah.
And with my training, again, through my family and all of the time that I spent with them, and then also through marriage, I was doing it all day long. And so I understood a lot of times that it's just having a different operating system. And it's not that they're going around and not necessarily want to communicate as effectively or not wanting to engage with people. It's just they don't necessarily have the tools in their toolkit. And they just want to, there's a part of them that does have a desire to be able to do it more effectively, but they don't know what they don't know. And so I think because of that, I realized that that's something that I could really have a big impact in helping people to be a lot stronger in that area. And I'd also say my training ground before, as soon as I graduated from university, I had a lot of leaders that I would say struggled with leadership, kind of got into leadership positions as individual contributors and really got no training. Nobody really helping to set them up for success, to understand how you coach and mentor, have difficult conversations, deal with conflict, be vulnerable, be transparent. A lot of these things they just hadn't seen modeled. And I felt so passionate about helping people get stronger in these areas because it's not something you either have it or you don't. It's
Mm.
something that's very coachable, it's very learnable, but you need to take the time and the space to be able to understand it and then figure out ways to make new patterns, new behaviors, new ways of doing things, building habits. And I think that's why I started to think to myself, like, if we could have more organizations where leaders are operating like this, we can have more engaged employees, we can have people that feel better and more excited to go into work. Every day we spend so many hours in our workplaces. And if we can be in those places where we feel a lot of emotional safety, where we feel that psychological safety, where we have leaders really supporting us. Sometimes those leaders, when I had really great leaders, those were people really maybe sometimes saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. They gave me an opportunity to take bigger jumps, to reach my potential in ways I might have not done without having them support me in that way. And so I just think there's such an opportunity to create more workplaces that have those kind of leaders operating inside them.
Yeah. And I agree with you that it is within everyone. It just oftentimes needs to be pulled out. It's not necessarily the natural way in which they communicate or how they coach people. I'm thinking back to my time at Tesla when I was dealing with a lot of engineers, just a lot of left brain operating individuals. And I'm imagining how they may respond, and how they often responded to me initially, which was, well, that all that stuff that sounds like fluff. Emotional intelligence, mindfulness. Like, no, we come here, we have a job to do. Just do the job and go home and leave that stuff for your family. What do you say to a leader who may respond in that way to the notion of, no, you need to be more self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and mindful?
Yeah, yeah, and that is the word that's used so often, right? Like, this stuff is just fluff, like, who cares about these soft things, right? Which just says so much too, right? Even saying the word soft, like, it feels like this is soft and I don't want to do so. I always have so much compassion for when I hear that, and I don't try to get defensive and like, "How could you think that?" I'm like, I get that. That makes so much sense. Like, tell me a little bit more around what you think this is. Like when you hear emotional intelligence and then they'll talk through it's like, well, it means you have to do this, this, and this. And then I start talking to them about, more information like, well, what if you felt like you could get that person to understand you in a better way and ultimately be performing better in their job? Or what if you had a better way when you're feeling really stressed to not feel so activated and feel? So I start getting them to really think about the ways that they are being impacted by that lack of EQ and how it's not necessarily making their world as good as they would like it to be. And then I think they start to create a different story and narrative around what emotional intelligence is and what it isn't. Because, I think people have this false narrative around like, oh, emotional intelligence means like you're going to go into meetings and you're going to be crying and sharing how you are. And it's like, no, no, no. And it's kind of where people have a false understanding of vulnerability as well, right? Like, I think some people over index and put things in the category of vulnerability that is like, no, you should not be sharing that with your team. That is not appropriate information. We want boundaries. Boundaries are a good thing. So I think once my number one tool in terms of how I show up is I would say curiosity. And the more that I stay curious to understand their perspective, like where's that coming from? And then we start to talk through a little bit more around like, hey, here's what emotional intelligence might be that you weren't aware of, and some of the ways it shows up and some of the ways it might make your life a lot easier. They tend to actually get super excited about it. They're like, oh, really? Like we could do this? Oh, I actually like that. Um, but they thought it was something completely different than the fluff. Because they've created this whole story around what the fluff is, and that's not what we're doing at all.
Yeah, I think the same is happening or has happened with the term mindfulness, where it's like this pop culture word now, and it's something that is supposed to just help you to be, singing kumbaya and holding hands together. Right? When in reality, it helps someone to have more clarity, make better decisions, respond objectively rather than through a trigger of some emotional thing that they're not even aware of. And I'm with you. Oftentimes when this is understood, someone sees it in a brand new light and then they're much more open to it. So I guess the challenge that we often have is helping people to realize the real benefits that come from these things uh, relative to the work that they do and the kind of results that they get versus only, oh, I'm trying to make people feel better.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. They have to understand like what is the payoff? Like what is the ROI? Again, the linear thinkers, they want data and numbers. And so I'll show them the science, like, hey, these are all the different things that you can have, the benefits of doing it. And they're like, oh, okay. I'm a little bit more intrigued here. I'm excited. Like, okay, there's all of this other stuff that I'm not I hadn't understood. And it's interesting, like with the whole mindfulness and meditation and kind of the languaging and what goes around with it, where, people again, I have had so many clients too, where they're thinking like the sitting down on a pillow and you have to be in like, oh no, like you're doing it in the moments, like you could be doing it in for 2 minutes in a moment when you're in a very high stakes meeting or before you're about to go into high stakes meeting. And one of the things I did with a lot of clients, which was interesting, and this is where it's playing on their goal orientation, I'd say, listen, why don't we just set a goal and we do 30 days? We just do a little 30-day meditation. Like if you just commit to it to 30 days, and by the end, if you find no results whatsoever, that's great. You let it go. But after 30 days, if something feels different, maybe you will be bought into this, excited. And every time I've done that with a leader, of course, by the end of the 30 days, they're like, this is the best thing I've ever done. And they also understand, like when we're talking through what meditation is and what it isn't, they had this belief that all of a sudden they were going to never have thoughts. And they start to see what they're doing in terms of training their brain and how by doing that in the morning, then it could be in those moments where they are feeling really reactive that they can pull themselves back so much quicker than they would have been if they weren't meditating. So they start to see all the results in action. But it was so interesting. Once I just said like, okay, we're not saying forever. Let's just do a little trial here. It's like, let's just pilot it. Just like you're used to piloting things in your organization. Let's just pilot meditation. We're not saying it's going to be something you commit to for the rest of your life. Give it a try. And it was so interesting because I was giving them a goal. There was something to work towards. And then all of a sudden, all of them did it. And I haven't had anyone, I've done this over the last 10 years. And when someone has said, sure, I'll try it, no one at the end has said, that was a terrible decision. Like, I wish I hadn't invested those 30 days in the meditation. That was so bad. No, never.
Same here. I've had exactly the same experience with leaders, especially even the ones. It's so funny because oftentimes the ones who are the most resistant end up saying it was the most beneficial.
Yes.
That happens a lot. And it's interesting that the ideas people have about things. It would be like if we were to go back, 100 plus years and tell someone you should physically exercise. And the person goes, no, I don't want to do that. And you tell them like, well, how about this 30 days? Just, go for a run every few days or go lift some weights every few days and tell me how you feel. 100% of people would say, that was great. I feel better. I feel healthier. We know that with physical fitness. Now we don't have to do those experiments. I do think it's analogous, though, to our own mind in our emotional state.
Exactly, exactly. And I think sometimes because we can get so in our head that being able to experience something now all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is what it's like, which is, I think, such a big part of coaching too. You can talk about what coaching is, but to be able to be in it and experience it for just 15 minutes and realize like, oh my gosh, like people can have a breakthrough in just 15 minutes by somebody asking them the right question and then thinking about something a little bit differently. So I think it's such a great reminder. And I know you do this when you're speaking as well, and why storytelling is so effective, because we could give all the data, we can give all of the, all of the facts, all of the studies, but being able to tell a really powerful story that helps someone to emotionally connect and see themselves in that story, all of a sudden, it's not just something they're understanding on a intellectual level. It's something that they're embodying and they can feel. And I think the more we can help them, which I think you do this so effectively with the podcast as well.
Oh, thank you. I'm with you. I'm a huge fan of stories and the ways in which they can shift our mindsets and completely change our behaviors. In Dwayne, in this story that we heard earlier, is really struggling with that vulnerability piece, which you touched on a moment ago. So Dwayne is someone who actually does really feel that sense of wanting to be of service and wanting to lead. And when in those moments where he could be vulnerable and he could open up, he hides, he holds back. So what's going on with with someone like Dwayne who has that desire to want to be more open, but
Mhm.
shuts down in the moment?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, first of all, I have so much love and compassion and care for Dwayne because I've coached and been around so many Dwaynes, and at moments I've been a Dwayne as well in my life as well, right? So, I want to start there. And I think with, when we talk through that scenario, there's a couple of things that really stood out for me. And one, before we even get into the vulnerability, is let's just even talk about Dwayne and his inner critic, because I think so many of us have that inner critic, and that inner critic can be very loud all day long, has a lot to say, and that narrative's going to look a little bit different for each of us. But it's that's that voice, and when you think about Dwayne and specifically him having two daughters and grandchildren, and the first thing that shows up for me when we start to think about that voice is, I'm curious, like, what would you say to your grandchildren or your daughters if they were talking to themselves that same way, right? Like, really berating yourself afterwards around what you did and how you should have done it differently, and being really, really tough on yourself. One of the things I talk a lot about with that inner voice, like, how would you talk to somebody you love? Right? You wouldn't talk to your kids in that way, and like, "Oh, you should have been so much better in that meeting, and what were you thinking?" and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, and I think it happens so much more than we realize,
Yep.
because we've got in workplaces, we've got leaders with this persona, and they have to seem so, tough and confident and put together, and yet they do leave meetings, they leave the office, and they're incredibly hard on themselves. And what I've seen with so many high performers is there's a part of them that believes that inner critic that can be very loud has helped them get to where they are today. So they think if they somehow let go of that voice, it's constantly being so mean and harsh, that they'll somehow lose their edge. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not true. Absolutely not. And so the first thing I wanted to just even address with this is just even acknowledging that, like, how can Dwayne start to become he's got the awareness, he knows this voice is there. How can he start to show up with more curiosity? And when that voice shows up around, like, is that really true? And can we look at this in a different way? And how's another way of looking at how we showed up in this meeting? And where does this voice come from? Like, is this really Dwayne at this point in my life talking? Or are these some other people's voices? Voices from childhood, teachers, like people in our past that are talking in this moment. Are these times where you were really struggling and you've got some protectors showing up, and these protectors are thinking that, like, these are our coping strategies, like, this is how we get to where we need to get to. And quite often it's like those coping strategies they came from such a good place, but they're not really serving you anymore, right? So just being able to challenge those beliefs, I think that is such a huge piece, just in terms of him being able to be more congruent and being who he truly is, and having more self-compassion and grace for allowing himself to be able to show up in meetings and say what he's going to say. And even if he did not say it perfectly, like, that's okay. Like, you're not supposed to be able to say things perfectly, because I think the better he gets at that and being able to do some more of his inner work and more of that inner exploration, and understand that emotional landscape better, then that helps him to do part two, which is part two is around, how are you showing up in the workplace? It's interesting because I feel like different parts are showing up, because there's a part of him who's saying, I want to be able to show more of my humanity. And I hear him being someone who cares deeply about his team. And yet they have this, like, there's this armor up, right? This
Yeah.
armor around, oh, like, he's kind of intimidating. He doesn't really let people in. They would have no idea that he has any insecurities, because he goes around pretending like there are none. Once you spend a little more time on the inner work and be able to connect with all parts of who he is and accept all parts and be less harsh, then he might start to feel like, ooh, how do I now bring this in front of other people? How do I start to be aware of expressing myself a little bit differently? And I really want to be cognizant of this because, again, this is work that I do a lot. I'm asking for baby steps here. I'm not asking you to go from A to Z. Okay, we're just going to go in and you're going to share everything that's going on in your inner landscape and let the guard down. And absolutely not. This is going to be something that happens over time.
Yeah.
But in those baby step ways, just like you're starting to get curious and show up a little bit differently for yourself when you're by yourself, what does it look like to let people in a little bit more and see parts of yourself where you might after a meeting say to somebody that you trust and maybe someone who feels a little bit less high stakes, someone that feels a little bit safer, say, I got to tell you, like, I left that meeting and I felt like I didn't show up the best. Like I felt like I didn't sound that well in the way I communicated things. Like it was a little bit uncomfortable for me. And just being able to openly share that. And what do you think? How did it feel for you? In that person that you trust a little bit more, it doesn't feel as high stakes. Now you're starting to build that muscle
Yeah.
around being able to show up a little bit more and ask questions and be more vulnerable in that you don't always have it figured out. You're not always perfect. You are sometimes second guessing yourself. And doing that more often. And then the other thing I would say, Jay, too, there's a boundaries thing happening here because if he's constantly jumping in and always doing things for his team because that's how he thinks he's showing care, I would say, okay, do you see your team as being naturally creative and resourceful and whole? Because I see you as not, because you're saying they can't handle these things. I need to jump in all the time. Then you're not helping them to also, like what we're doing with you personally, Dwayne, and building your emotional resilience. You're not giving them an opportunity to build their resilience because you're taking it away from them. Because anytime there might be a struggle, you're jumping in. How are they going to learn and grow? Because you're taking those learning and growth opportunities away from them.
Yeah. Well, I think if we were to go back to that self-talk that you covered, I think you covered it really well. That critic, that judgmental voice that's gonna be so harsh. I agree with you that so often people are not aware of how much they're doing it until you really start to shine the light of awareness on it. Because they're like, oh, I guess I don't know if I do. And then when they start to watch and observe, they're like, oh my goodness, like I'm pretty harsh to myself. And I appreciate that you said that, you know, people feel like, well, that's my edge. I get that. I hear that a lot, Kristen. That's what's really driven me. I mean, that voice in my head that's pushing me forward. And if I lose that, then I won't be as ambitious. And I appreciate that you said I'll use the word silly. It's silly because we're thinking in such binary terms. And I use this metaphor and I want to get your thoughts on it. It's like, let's say, I don't know, we'll talk, let's say soccer because it's the World Cup time right now. So if you were to choose the type of coach that you play for, what kind of coach would you want? Would you want a coach that just sat on the bench and did nothing and showed no interest in what you're doing? Of course not. You wouldn't want that coach. You wouldn't want to play for that coach. You wouldn't want the coach that's in your face all the time, screaming at you, telling you you're not good, and forcing you to have to keep going and going and going, even when you're tired and you need rest. You don't want that coach either. What you want is the coach that sees you as a human being and is challenging you to continue to improve. The coach that's supporting you as a human, as well as driving you to be better. And I think all of us can be that coach for ourselves.
Yes. Exactly, exactly. Like I talk so much about with leaders when you're coaching others, you have to start by coaching yourself, right? And noticing those times. Like exactly, like would you want that coach to be talking to you like that voice in your head all day long? Like is that really setting you up for success? As you were talking, I was remembering Ted Lasso and why I love Ted Lasso so much and some of his unconventional ways too, but it was so good at engaging, but he was constantly seeing the potential and seeing things in others. And this is, I talk so much, and I'm glad you feel the same way, Jay, is because it's not about over indexing on one or the other, right? Because I've seen where it's too much of the compassion and empathy and feeling like I don't want things to be hard for them. I don't want them to ever suffer. And I personally understand this as a parent as well, right? Like it can be hard. You don't want your kids to have to suffer, but there's also another part of me that understands that that's their journey and that's where their learning and growth comes and the emotional resilience comes from. They can do hard things. And we also don't want too far the other way because we want accountability, we want ownership, we want people helping you to constantly like go out of those, like hit those edges, right? Those times where you're like, I've got nothing else in me. And it's like, I think you do. Like it's that little bit extra, but they're not saying, yeah, you do, and do another 3 hours and be exhausted so that, tomorrow in your game, you're not going to actually show up as well because you've overextended. We don't want that. And especially when we've seen the ones where they're just operating through fear. Like we have enough research and data to support like operating and leading through fear is not going to be something that's sustainable and lead to someone being very successful. And all sports, you see that as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the beauty is, and of course, everyone's a work in progress and you're not going to always get like right in the middle and perfectly integrated. But the goal is to be constantly working on integrating both of them.
I hear you. And Kristen, I've seen leaders back when I worked in corporate who used fear and at times would kind of like brag about it. Like that, yeah, oh, look, I have this kind of measure in place. And they will at times get short-term results because people are operating from fear. But over a long enough period of time, it always will end badly, where that the people just are not motivated. They're not inspired because they're only doing it out of the fear of consequence for not doing it the right way or not doing it the way the manager wants. And so I hear you. And I think the other part that you talked about with vulnerability, the example that I thought of, I often I have a term for it. I call it playing the harp. So, you get on a call with someone, and normally the conversation always starts with, "Hi, how are you?" And someone says, "I'm doing good. How are you?" Right? That's the normal exchange. One way that someone like Dwayne can practice a bit of vulnerability is when asked, "How are you?" Just give a little bit more of something personal, not like you said, not your whole life story, but maybe just something from, let's say, your grandson that happened earlier that week or over that past weekend that you want to share. And it's just anecdotal. It's not a big deal, but it could help Dwayne to be able to take the steps towards being vulnerable. And he could be really intentional about it. Who am I going to share it with? I'm going to mention at the top of this call. And what he's going to find from that, Kristen, is it's going to feel good. He's going to like it. He's going to enjoy it. And then he will then open himself up to more opportunities to share in that way.
I love that. And you're reminding me of a story actually from a leader I coached over 5 years ago. So I had forgotten about it. And he's a CFO with an organization and he struggled with vulnerability. And I remember, I don't even know how it came up, but it came out because he had a child and his child at that point, I think was a year old. And he said, nobody at work even knows that he has a child. And I said, what? Like, what is going on? Are you serious? And we had a great discussion around it. And eventually, we're working on different things to be more vulnerable. And where he eventually got to was he brought in a picture of his daughter to put in his office. And for him, that was huge, right? Like he didn't have any pictures of anyone from his family in his office. And that was him really getting outside of his comfort zone. And of course, everyone would come to his office and see him. I'm like, who's this? Like, oh, it's my daughter. And so many beautiful conversations. And that one thing led to other things because then once he started to talk, of course, whenever he talked about his daughter, he would completely light up. People would see another side of him. And then when he was lit up with that, then they all of a sudden started to ask other questions. And I know part of his was cultural as well. He was from Africa, and some of the things that he learned from his culture too is like it was very much like your work life and then your home life, and we don't bring both in the same place. And I was helping him in baby steps to get more comfortable and letting more parts of himself be seen. But your story reminds me so much of that. Just like when you're in the meetings, I encourage that too. Like, what's it? Just sharing a little bit of you, even with soccer, right? Like sometimes people don't even know, like, ooh, in soccer, like who who's your favorite player, right? Like great play, like Messi, awesome. Why is Messi your favorite? And so you get into these dialogues, and everybody has passions. And so just sharing a little bit about something that you're passionate about for ones who might feel more introverted, I think is such a great starting point, because you're always going to be feel more comfortable sharing when it's something that just is, it brings an aliveness in you because it's a natural passion.
Yeah, and it creates connection, and that's what we're all looking for is connection. And as a leader, if you're thinking, well, again, it's about results as result. Well, when you have connection and when people trust you because they see you as a human being, they're going to produce for you. They're going to say yes to the things that you are asking of them. And the other part about this, which you touched on, was the boundaries piece. And so Dwayne is, yeah, he's saying yes to everything, or he's jumping in to try to be what I call that superhero, right? Where I come in and I have to save the day. I'm the firefighter all the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like what it's all interrelated because he doesn't, maybe he doesn't trust his team, or he hasn't yet empowered them because he doesn't have that connection yet. And when you don't have that connection, it's like I have to come in and do it to try to, make sure it's all done right. Or it's like, well, I'm a bit insecure about whether you think I'm good enough, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to do it for you all the time, right? And that's my way of feeling like I'm a validated leader. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Yes, because I would also be curious, of course, if I was coaching and asking a lot more questions to get underneath at the roots. A lot of times when people are taking on that rescuer or firefighter or jumping in, they're getting a sense of worth from that, right? When I do that, now I feel like enough. Now I feel like I'm valued. Now I feel validated, which for so many of us, when we get at the root, that's underneath it, right? Like I want to
Yeah.
feel lovable. I want to feel like I'm enough. I want to feel like I measure up. And so being in that rescuer role can feel like, oh, I'm going in, I'm jumping in, I'm firefighting. I have value. And so that's so interesting, because then when you start to pull that out, you're wanting to work through, where does that story come from? Where are those beliefs? Opportunity to create new beliefs. And the beauty is, like, once you make conscious what was unconscious and realize that these beliefs were operating in the backgrounds, you get to create a new story and a new way of showing up. I mean, I'm comfortable to share, and I share this with my leaders. I share in stories all the time when I'm training. I got separated a couple of years ago. I was in a marriage for 25 years, very amicable, and we're co-parenting beautifully, and in a very good place around both as mutually understanding why it ended. But I also afterwards had to do my own work to see, like, okay, what patterns were operating in that marriage for all these years. Oh, there's a lot of over functioning. There's a lot of people pleasing. There were times where there was some of that codependency in terms of my emotional regulation. So I got to take an opportunity to learn that so that I can create new patterns when I get into, and I am in a new relationship now, to make sure I don't repeat those patterns again.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. And we start to look at this from the neuroscience, like just because you have some beliefs or some behaviors or some habits doesn't mean like, well, that's the way it is. That's how it's been in the last 50 years. I can't do anything to change it. That is absolutely not true. I am completely creating brand new patterns. I'm already noticing how quickly with neuroplasticity, how you can really quickly, depending on what it is, some it might feel like they're so ingrained, but when you have that awareness and realize like, ooh, this is what my natural inclination is to do this. Like with Dwayne, his natural inclination is to be the savior, to run in and firefighting. That's interesting. Where does that come from? How can we create new patterns? And the more you do it, the more those start to become ingrained, and you start to show up differently, and you start to feel much more satisfied personally and professionally.
Yeah. And it really does require being so intentional, Kristen. I mean, you have to be intentional about all this to know in the moment to pause and hold back from your natural reaction of, oh, I'll do it. I'll save the day. And instead turn to a question. And
Yes.
instead, even just say, let me look into it. I'll get back to you. So that way you have some time to process before you go ahead and just jump in the way you always have. And I feel like everyone has that capacity to do this. It just needs to be front of mind. Now, one thing I have to ask you about, we talked about it once before in a previous conversation, is behind you, there is a sign that says, all you need is love. And for anyone watching on YouTube, you could see it. Talk to me about what that means to you.
Hmm. Well, I think you and I both share deeply around this belief. Ultimately, we all want to give and receive love. And so the more we can really stay connected to that part of ourselves and notice those times where we start to kind of um, close in and armor up and stay away, like we're not connected to that we can use the word love, connection, compassion that's in each and every one of us. And the more you stay that connected to that in yourself, the more you have to give and share to others. And I believe it's a beautiful ripple effect, right? Like we all want to be in a world is filled with so many more people just sharing and giving that love with each other. And that's what humanity definitely needs right now. It's always needed it, but even more so where we can have, for a variety of reasons, some shutting down and people not connecting in this way. And I really, really, truly believe the more that each of us can stay connected and stay open to that love that is within us and share it with others, we're going to have a much more beautiful, loving world.
It's beautifully stated. And when we say love, how I understand it, and I think you agree with this, it's the mindset of giving without expecting anything in return. It's to give without attachment, without saying I'm only doing this so I can get something from it. That's not love. What love is just to give for the sake of giving, to support for the sake of supporting. And when you operate from that space, amazing things happen. All the things that you hoped would happen, the byproducts end up coming naturally. And so, Chris, if you were to meet Dwayne in this story, let's say he comes to you for some help and he needs some one-on-one coaching, and you're going through the process of understanding what he's going through, and he tells you his story, and you want to ask him a question that would get him to start to think differently, interrupt that the patterns neurologically, and start to consider alternative approaches. What would you ask him and why?
Yeah. Yeah. Was really jumping out at me right now because as you were describing his story in terms of it sounded like a really deep connection with his kids and his grandkids. And I would ask him, like, look at your grandkids or your kids like 20 years from now. What would you want them to say in terms of the type of leader you were, how you showed up, not only for your family, but how you showed up in your workplace, how you showed up for the humans around you? What would you want them to say? And what does it look like to live into that vision?
I love that because that creates clarity, doesn't it? And it does so from a third party perspective where you're looking at it from the angle of what I would want my loved one to say about me. That's a really great way to put it. And I think all of us can ask ourselves that question. Everyone listening, how would you want the people you love the most to speak of you as a leader 5, 10, 20 years down the road? And for all our listeners, I highly recommend look up the great work Kristen's doing as a coach, as a speaker, as a trainer. Her website is KristenHarcourt.com, KristenHarcourt.com. We'll put that in the show notes, as well as the Inspirational Leadership Podcast, where there's so many great conversations you're having on leadership, emotional intelligence, and mindfulness. And I know you said you're quite active on LinkedIn, so anyone can also find you there. Kristen, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me. This was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really, really appreciate the beautifully intentional questions that you asked. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks for having me.
All of us can relate to that inner critic, can't we? I know that it's something I've struggled with for years. It's often what I see in ambitious, driven leaders. So I hope this conversation was valuable for you, and I'll do my best to give you what I believe are the 3 takeaways from this great conversation with Kristen. The first one is silence the inner critic without losing your edge. So many of us believe that inner critic is what gives us an edge, but it's just not true. It's not required in order for you to achieve at a high level. And when that voice does show up, get curious. Where is it coming from? Is that something that you learned from a parent or from your environment growing up? Or where is it coming from? It's just valuable to be able to take inventory of what that really is. And from there, you can learn how to let it go. The second takeaway Vulnerability is not all or nothing. You could start small. If you feel guarded at times and you don't want to share too much, start small. Maybe one little personal anecdote in a meeting or in a one-on-one conversation. You don't need to spill your guts, right? And every time you do one small act, you're building that muscle of being able to be more vulnerable in your communication. And the third takeaway, pilot it before you commit. If you've ever thought about mindfulness or meditation, emotional intelligence, and you feel like maybe it's not for you, don't feel like you have to transform everything about yourself in one instance. Pilot it and give yourself the grace that if after a week or 30 days of a certain practice, you can let that go. You can decide that it's not for you. And also, if you're encouraging other people as a leader to take on something new, give them the same kind of approach, which is just, let's have a little bit of an experiment. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. Join us on Friday's episode. I thought a lot about what Kristen said in that inner critic, and I want to tell you the story of Jack. When I was on a meditation retreat years ago, I learned of an approach, I should say, of how to deal with the inner critic. And it stuck with me ever since. I've been using it for years, and it's helped me to not be in a state of fighting with myself anymore. I've learned this little technique can help me to be much more kind and not lose my edge either, right? It's just to work through when that inner critic comes up, which it does all the time. So I'm going to share that with you and how you can use a similar tactic to work through your own inner critic and self-doubt. You can make it yours. And anyone I've given it to has told me how it's been so helpful for them to work through that voice that tries to constantly put you down. So don't miss that on Friday. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. I am rooting for you.